BYU men's basketball suffers their third straight loss. This program is at a crossroads, and as sad as it is to say, it could get a whole lot worse before it gets better.
You are Locked On Cougars, your daily podcast on the BYU Cougars, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, everybody? Welcome into Locked On Cougars, your daily podcast focused on the BYU Cougars. I'm Jake Hatch, 14-year credentialed media member at BYU, your resident expert and insiders, your host here on this show. And as always, thank you for making Locked On Cougars your first listen of the day. And thank you for making all of us folks over at Locked On, the #1 sports podcast network. All right, coming up on today's show, reaction to BYU in their latest loss to the Oklahoma State Cowboys. And then Kevin Young addressing the insidious F the Mormons chant. We'll get into that and let you hear what he had to say post-game after that nonsense reared its ugly head once again. And then we'll finish up today's show with a season preview ahead as BYU women's softball gets their season underway in Florida. And it's all brought to you today by our friends over at Game Time. Download the Game Time app today, create an account, redeem the promo code Locked On College, and get $20 off your first purchase. All right, so let's get the game out of the way real quick here. BYU suffers their third straight loss, this time losing to the Oklahoma State Cowboys 99-92. Yes, you heard that right. BYU gave up 99 points to the Oklahoma State Cowboys. I look at this as BYU's third straight loss as bottoming out, I hope. But as I kind of mentioned in the open of today's show, it could get worse before it gets better. I was looking at this game, for those of you who are everydayers, as a relative layup for BYU. One of the games that gets you feeling good about yourselves. You get a win no matter how it comes against Oklahoma State. And then you try to find some confidence heading into a showdown against number 8, Houston, in Provo on Saturday night. Nope. Here's the deal. This BYU basketball team is absolutely at a crossroads, and in some ways, it feels like this team is broken, particularly on the defensive side of the ball. And until they can find a way to muster up, quite simply, pride, I'm just going to go there, pride in defending and defending as a unit, they're going to continue to take some of the thrashings they are taking right now. We have talked often this season when BYU has lost the games. And in fact, by the way, I should say this is the first loss all year that BYU was a favorite in. Before this, they were 17-0 as betting favorites going into a game this season. They were 0-4. Their 4 losses to this point before this were all as a betting, the underdog in terms of if you look at lines and the like. This is the first as a quote unquote upset. In that respect, Oklahoma State fans spilling onto the court storming. Awesome scenes in Stillwater if you're a Cowboys fan. And congratulations to our good friend Cody Stovall and Locked On Pokes. They're doing a great thing over there. But looking at this, we have talked often, the BYU's big issue defensively has been allowing teams to torch them from the three-point line. The perimeter defense has been an issue. And Oklahoma State did shoot okay, 33% from beyond the arc. But you want to know where things turned in this game for BYU against Oklahoma State? BYU gave up 52 points in the paint, 100 plus in the restricted area, for lack of a better term, on that front, the paint, whatever you want to call it. That is awful. And Kevin Young, you can guarantee he was ripping into his guys saying, okay, we had issues on the perimeter. Guess what? We held him to 33%, 7 of 21 from beyond the arc. Anthony Roy was 5 of 10. He actually torched BYU in this game with 30 points. Congratulations. He's their leading scorer and had a night. But the issue is you cannot give up 100 points in the paint and expect to win many, if any, basketball games. BYU's defense, quite literally, it feels like, is in tatters. And I'm not sure there is a good answer for what's going wrong. Will Voigt is supposed to be the mastermind. He's been the defensive coordinator for BYU. He has been trying to get this team, I think, on the same track, but they have tried seemingly every defensive scheme, whatever you want to call it, all year long, trying to find an adequate answer defensively, and Oklahoma State torched it, and now I think they're at a loss as to what to do. And maybe they have an answer, and maybe they're going to come back and stun us against Houston, and that would be awesome. But the way things look right now, it could get a whole lot more sideways for BYU basketball. And we're talking, it's it's not an easy schedule ahead. Number 8 Oklahoma on the horizon. You got games also against number 1 Arizona. By the way, this time down in Tucson. There's no rest for the weary. The Big 12 is going to absolutely test you. They go to Baylor next week. They have a home game against Iowa State, the number 7 team in the country. Does UCF, West Virginia, Cincinnati, any of those look winnable, like imminently winnable to you right now? I wouldn't think so, and I don't blame you if you don't think so. The issue is BYU has to muster up pride, and they have to find a way to put together a coherent defensive scheme. Guys are out of position far too often. I'm talking across the board. It is not good enough. It is for a team that has had the vaunted expectations that this team had entering this season. They are far, far from being the team that I believe could go out and accomplish what I think a lot of us hope they could accomplish coming into this season. There were some positives in this game. I will be very blunt. AJ Dybantsa, 13-20 from the field, 36 points, 5 of 8 from 3. One of his finest performances offensively as a BYU basketball player, but he's not going to feel right about that considering they lost this game. Richie Saunders, 20 points. Robert Wright III, 15 points. But yet again, there's a lack of production out of the other guys from BYU's roster. It's the big 3 or nothing, it feels like, for the BYU basketball program. You got 8 points from Kennard Davis Jr., which is an uptick. He was 2 of 5 from the three-point line. You'll take that. BYU's a team, 43% from the three-point arc, 13 of 30. They shot 50% from the field, but they fell in a third straight game. And this is the game I think that's going to stick in most of the craw of Cougar Nation's mouth, is because you can explain away maybe a Kansas game. They're ranked, obviously, going to Allen Fieldhouse. You can explain away maybe losing to the number 1 team in the country. But the effort level for stretches in this game, significant stretches of this game, was lacking. And that's the concern, because Oklahoma State, they're a middling Big 12 program. They're trying to fight their way onto the NCAA tournament bubble, and a win like this does help them in that regard. They're 16-6 now, 4-5 in the conference. BYU, as comparison, 17-5, 5-4. I talked yesterday about how I felt like that West Virginia game last year was the linchpin that really turned things around for BYU. Well, if you're doing the math and the way things panned out last year, it was a 20-game conference schedule, but at this juncture, BYU lost the 2 games and then had the turnaround against West Virginia. The problem is you've got, as I said, Houston coming up on Saturday and then at Baylor midweek next week. That's not an easy stretch, and nor is any of these games remaining for the BYU basketball program, maybe outside of the home game against Colorado on Valentine's Day. I don't have a good answer as to what BYU basketball needs to do, but that's what Kevin Young's paid for. That's what his coaching staff is paid for. That is what these players, let's be blunt, that's what these players are being paid for. There's got to be accountability. There's got to be answers found. There probably needs to be a players-only meeting, and I hope it's a guy like Richie Saunders or AJ Dybantsa who is getting those guys in the same room saying, guys, speaking of the players, we got to figure this out. We have to play with more pride. We got to go out there and play the type of basketball that I think, speaking from my vantage point as a podcast host, I call myself a second guesser. That's what I am. There's more that this BYU basketball team can put on the court and hopefully will put on the court. But I think everybody is looking for answers right now, and none are readily available at this juncture. Coming up next, it's reared its ugly head again. And for the life of me, I'm sick of talking about it, but hey, let's get into it.
I'm Kalia Butler, host of Locked On Women's Basketball, and this is Mazda's Women's Basketball Snapshot, celebrating the work no highlight reel can ever capture. Number 1 ranked UConn dominated Tennessee 96-66, turning a halftime tie into a historic win and avenging last season's loss by delivering the largest margin in the rivalry's history. AZ Fudd had 27 points and Sarah Strong added 26 as the Huskies remain perfect on the season, reminding everyone why they are the reigning national champions. In the Big Ten, number 2 UCLA rolled past number 8 Iowa 88-65, powered by 22 points from Angela Dukelich and a huge advantage in the paint, staking their claim as a national threat. These moments are earned off the clock, those long before the lights ever come on. The sweat, the fakes, the doubt, the scrapes, and coming back for more every time. Mazda puts that same drive into every detail. Wins define the moment, putting in the work, that defines you. There's more to a Mazda because there's more to you.
Thank you once again for making Locked On Cougars your first listen of the day. And thank you to all of you for making Locked On the #1 sports podcast network. If you are a true everyday and you want to take it to the next level, you can join us on the Locked On Cougars Everydayer Club. Go to lockedoncougars.supercast.com. Got a bevy of different options, different tiers you can join at, all kinds of different features, ad-free audio episodes, access to our merch store. We have a brand new exclusive members only Discord server and a whole litany more of things. If you want to go to lockedoncougars.supercast.com, you can join it today, and appreciate all of you who've already done so and may consider doing so in the near future. One of my most viral 7.5 years I've done this podcast came in the aftermath of the Cincinnati football game this past fall, when I called out the bigotry of the F the Mormons chant that was heard resonating throughout Nippert Stadium in Cincinnati, Ohio. I hoped then, and I still hope at this literal moment, whenever you hear and or watch this, that it will be nipped in the bud at some point. But once again, it reared its ugly head last night, the F the Mormons chant. And I got to give major credit to Kevin Young for calling it out and addressing it in the way he did. So, courtesy of Jackson Payne from the Deseret News, here is what Kevin Young had to say about the situation and his thoughts on hearing that derogatory, awful chant once again.
I'm going to do it. Just there was some F the Mormons chants tonight by the student section that I heard. And, you know, it's a great win for Oklahoma State University. Their fans should be proud. But it would be great if you know, some class was warrant, you know, in there as well. You know, I got 4 small kids at home. You know, I'm a Mormon. When I go home, they're going to ask me about it. Same way they asked me about it last year at Arizona. There's just too much hate in the world to be saying stuff like that. We got enough problems in our world without going at people's religion and beliefs, and like whether it's in vogue or not. And we don't even have our whole teams. We only have probably 4 or 5 guys who are even Mormon on the team. I understand what we represent, but even for a guy like AJ, you know, like that stuff is unwarranted. And like I said, man, like, you know, I try to talk to our guys about being examples in the world. Like, we can use basketball to really just bring people together and not tear people apart. It's something we talk about a lot. And it's just disappointing. So I hope someone prints that. I hope it's in bold on someone's publication, and just try to maybe together as a society we can just help the world kind of move forward and not divide each other and with hate and things that's really nonsensical. Thank you.
Add it to the banner. If you're watching this on YouTube, you can see the overlay I just threw up. This has been floating around as these incidences have been happening. And yes, reportedly it happened at Kansas. It wasn't addressed then. I don't know necessarily in what circumstance it was, but people did say that it happened at Kansas. And that adds to Cincinnati and Colorado. It goes back. You remember Arizona, as Kevin Young referred to last year. Providence in 2024. It goes all the way back to 2002. Remember, Stanford had that skit that their band put on when BYU played out there on the farm. This has been going on for far too long. And in some ways, it's almost becoming a parody of itself. And I hate calling it a parody because it's bigotry, plain and simple. I'm sick of it. I'm over it. Like I said, it was one of the most viral moments I've ever had on this podcast, but I was speaking from the heart then. I speak from the heart now. Kevin Young is right. He's got 4 young kids at home. I've got 3 of my own. They're all under 10 years old. My daughter saw that clip, the video I did talking about the F the Mormons chant after the Cincinnati game, and said, "Dad, why do people say that about us?" And I said, "I don't have a good answer for you, honey. I really don't." And I wish I had a good answer for it. And it's beyond dumb. And I'm sick of people saying, well, it's just young college kids and they don't know what they're doing. You know what? They're old enough to vote. They're old enough to own a gun. They're old enough to do a litany of different things. They're old enough to realize that what they're doing is bigotry, plain out, simply put, underline it, period, end of story. It irks me. It it doesn't sit right with me that we are going to absolve young people of saying something that attacks literally a religion, a worldwide religion. I have said it before. I will say it again. If you want to say F BYU, I got zero problem with you criticizing Brigham Young University. And I know it may sound almost like counterintuitive, but BYU is an institution. It's a university. It is a institution of higher learning. When you cry F the Mormons, even though it is a nickname, it refers to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and the 17 plus million members worldwide. That is a group of people that you are criticizing, and we wouldn't tolerate it for any other religion, any other creed, any other protected class. We don't tolerate it for anything. But for some reason, once again, the Mormons, free game, at least in the minds of some bigoted Oklahoma State students. And I'm expecting an apology of some sort. Cincinnati was never fined for their incident. Now, Colorado was last fall in the football season. I have not heard anything in terms of Kansas being reprimanded, issuing a public apology. But this one, that Kevin Young, the fact that he called it out, I'm expecting a statement from Oklahoma State. And as often is the case, it's probably going to be AI, stick it into whatever AI program, Grok, Chat GPT, Gemini, whatever one they utilize, spit out a statement saying, this does not represent the standards in the Oklahoma State, and we apologize. It's a non-apology apology. And I'm over it. I think the vast majority of those out there, whether you're an active member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, inactive, ex-Mormon, I don't care what you are, never been a Mormon, the vast majority of us, speaking of myself included, understand that this needs to be stamped out. As Kevin Young said, there is a whole lot of just awfulness in this world right now. And if you don't believe me, just look around. We need to be better just collectively. I state on the record here, and I'll reiterate it once again, that my belief in terms of what I consider to be the two great commandments, because that's what Jesus Christ taught them to be, are to love God with your whole heart, mind, strength, whatever you want to, just love God. And the second one, love thy neighbor as thyself. And what that means is love people, be a good human being. And I am sick of having people rip a religion that I believe wholeheartedly, and I have devoted 2 years of my life to going out and preaching it in the streets of southern Taiwan. And there are thousands, if not millions of you within the sound of my voice who have done the exact same thing. And the fact that this continues to pop up, and it's, like I said, almost becoming a parody of itself, it's disgusting. And I'm going to call on Brett Yormark right now. Call it out. End it. And quite honestly, I wish BYU administration, I'm glad that Kevin Young, BYU don't want to touch it with a 10-foot pole. Just point blank. They don't. They're willing to just leave it where it is. I appreciate Kevin Young being willing to speak out on it. But Brian Santiago, Shane Reese, the university president, heck, the leadership of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints could make a major impact if they were to say enough's enough here. And I hope they do. Now, I have no sway in that regard. I am a simple podcast host who talks about a team that is near and dear to his heart. But this type of stuff, it needs to be curbed. It needs to be completely cut out, stamped out, and never have its ugly head reared again. But the sad part is it's continuing to almost pick up steam in a way. Because as I said, twice in the football season last year in the span of about a month and a half. And now we had Kansas last week that reportedly happened. And then Wednesday night, it happens at Oklahoma State. Is it going to happen when BYU goes to Baylor next week? I sincerely hope not, because I think Baylor is a religiously minded institution. Their fan base, I think, understands what I'm talking about. But it irks me, and I hope that comes across, because I'm tired of it. I'm tired of having to call it out. And I wish I had some way to say, you don't realize what you're doing. But apparently, we're going to keep talking about it, because I'll keep talking about it as long as it keeps happening. That's what we're going to do. All right. We'll finish up today's show next, talking BYU softball. Yes, it's one of those sports we don't talk about a lot, but there are two programs I thought were at maybe the biggest disadvantage when BYU made the transition to the Big 12 Conference. One of them begins their season today. The other one starts next week, and we're going to talk about them and why I believe one of them has the answers. The other one may not quite yet, but we'll dig into that next. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at Indeed. Now, if you are trying to hire, hiring is not just about finding someone who's willing to take the job. It's about finding the right person with the right background who can actually help your business move forward. And if you want candidates who match what you're looking for, Indeed sponsored jobs is the move, because instead of hoping the right person stumbles upon your post, Indeed helps you match with quality candidates by boosting your job listing to people who fit your specific criteria: skills, certification, location, etc. If I were hiring, I wouldn't want just to hire someone who can help. I want someone who with the real experience who can jump right in and handle the workload. It saves time because you're spending less energy sorting through mismatches, and with sponsored jobs, your post gets seen by candidates who are actually a fit for the position you're trying to hire for. So here's a stat that says it all. In the minute I have been talking to you, companies like yours made 27 hires on Indeed, according to Indeed data worldwide. So if you're hiring, spend less time searching and more time interviewing candidates who check all of your boxes with our friends over at Indeed sponsored jobs. Today's show is also brought to you by our friends over at Game Time. There's nothing like being in an NBA arena, the crowd, the energy, the moment. Getting tickets, though, part has not always been so simple. That's why Game Time has become the go-to app for scoring tickets fast, without the hassle, puts the advantage back where it belongs with you, the fan. You can pull up the Game Time app, pick an upcoming NBA game. For me to be the Utah Jazz, most likely. You have tickets locked in within literal minutes and a couple of taps. I love seeing the all-in price right up front. No surprise fees at checkout, and be able to see the view from your seats. You know exactly what to expect when you arrive at the venue. It absolutely makes the decision as easy as it possibly can be, and everything feels quick, intuitive, and stress-free from start to finish. Take the guesswork out of buying your NBA tickets and do it with Game Time. Download the Game Time app today. Create an account and redeem the promo code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. That's promo code LOCKEDON. That's locked on for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. And remember, it's gametime.co, not .com. All right, so the BYU women's softball program is going to begin their season today in Florida, and that does not suck, obviously, to go down to Florida. Now, the BYU softball program is a program that at BYU, when BYU transitioned into the Big 12 Conference, they had competed at a very, very high level. And we're talking, this is a team that BYU had a stretch of, I think it was 16 or 17 years, maybe more than that, straight of making the NCAA regionals, and that was across multiple conferences. Members of the WAC, the MPSF, the Mountain West Conference. There was another there at one point, and I can tell you, just the interest of full disclosure, that my wife was a former BYU softball player, and if I recall her career, the way it played out, I think that she won 4 conference titles in 4 straight years in 4 different conferences. It was a really, really crazy time for BYU softball with all the transition that happened. Oh, it was West Coast Conference, duh. That was an easy one to remember. But the bigger point is BYU softball has a very strong tradition. Gordon Eakin has built a winning program, and it was proven, like I said, over multiple decades. And then came the news that BYU was going to join the Big 12 Conference. And when BYU joined the conference, the biggest of the big fish in college softball is Oklahoma, and they were in the conference. Now they have transitioned to the SEC, but there are still some Leviathans out there, none bigger than Texas Tech right now in Big 12 softball. If you did not pay attention, you obviously know that Texas Tech has spent quite a bit of money when it comes to NIL and college football. Did you know it kind of extends over to softball? Nigel Kennedy had them within a game of the World Series title last year, speaking of Texas Tech. And if you look at the preseason all-conference team for the Big 12 Conference, well, let's just put it this way. It is very, very pro Texas Tech. And let's be honest, for good reason, because Texas Tech is ranked either number 1 or number 2 in the country going into the season. They are far and away the favorite in the Big 12 Conference. And if you go down the list, Oklahoma State's ranked, Arizona's ranked, and other programs of strong tradition like Arizona State are right there tied for 3rd with their arch rival Utah. And then BYU ranked, tied for, it's actually 6th, excuse me. They were 6th in the preseason poll. And the bigger point of what I'm trying to say here about BYU softball as their season begins today is I got to give major credit where credit is due to Gordon Eakin and his staff. They have adapted. They have found ways to compete in a sport as a cold weather school that you're not supposed to be able to compete at the level they have competed at. And they have missed out on the NCAA tournament in recent seasons, but they haven't missed out by much. The hope is that this year they will be able to break through. And that's the hope for BYU softball this spring, is that they don't find themselves as the first team out as they have been. I think it's 2 of the last 3 years. They have been that first team out when it came to the NCAA tournament. And it really came down to the fact that their non-conference slate and some of the losses they absorbed in the preseason schedule hurt them. And there's a big reason for that, because BYU softball spends the better part of a month and a half, or first half of the season almost, on the road, because as a cold weather school, it's kind of hard to play games when there's a threat of snow. Now, this winter's been a little atypical, as we all know, here along the Wasatch Front, and BYU maybe could have played some games at home in the early part of this schedule, but they are in Florida this weekend. I believe they are going to be off to, I've got to remember where they're going after that, but they play these tournaments every single weekend for the first stanza of the season. And this is when they need to pile up wins that can give them that boost when it comes to the NCAA tournament. They open up today, 5 o'clock Mountain Time, against number 4 Tennessee. Wow, talk about a way kicking off your season against a top 5 ranked team. But they also face Michigan State this weekend, Notre Dame, Penn State, Missouri. Those are all very, very strong programs. Big Ten, SEC, obviously Notre Dame. I think they're a member of the ACC in this sport. So strong weekend to open up for BYU. They're going to go to Texas next weekend. They'll play Incarnate Word and then participate in the Texas State hosted event where they'll play 2 ranked teams there. Gordon Eakin understands the assignment here. Are his teams going to take some L's? Absolutely. But the RPI boost that comes, much like for basketball, when you play against a ranked opponent, when you play against a ranked opponent in college softball, and thereby going to strengthen your strength of record, strength of schedule, all the different things, those metrics that could get BYU softball into the postseason. I thought, and like I said, my wife played for BYU softball, and I have watched it, I'm not saying from afar, but I have observed this program really show what it takes to adapt to a new level of football and understand the assignment, and to understand that, hey, what we did for years that worked for us isn't going to work at this level. And that is a credit to Gordon Eakin. Gordon's a living legend. He's been around BYU for a long, long time. I believe he is only the second, if I recall correctly, coach in BYU softball history, at least at the NCAA Division I level. There was a club program before it became a full-fledged NCAA sport, but he is the second coach in program history, and he has put together an incredible run. And the old adage, the old dogs can't learn new tricks. Well, I'm not gonna lie. I thought that Gordon, as long as he had been at BYU, wouldn't necessarily be able to adapt to the rigors and understanding what the Big 12 was going to require of him. But he hired really good staff around him, and all they've done is go out and up their recruiting. They have brought in players who have bought into this program, and they have benefited from it. And I hope that it works out to what they hope it can work out to be, and that is to be a team that can compete in the Big 12 favorably and really compete for, I'm not saying a conference title, because I said Texas Tech is out there looming, but to be a team that can make the NCAA tournament and be competitive in that sphere. That was one of my major concerns. If you wanted to ask, okay, Jake, which programs jumping in the Big 12 conference are going to be the biggest disadvantage? And I would have said baseball and softball, because cold weather schools playing spring sports that go up against teams that BYU softball has to practice in the IPF because they can't get on the dirt typically this time of year. And that puts them at a disadvantage when they finally get to these tournaments and play on the dirt. It happened for BYU baseball. Now, baseball has changed things with their heated field, the synthetic turf and the like. But I really respect what BYU softball has done here. As I said, kind of just adapting to what a new reality is for this program. So best of luck to the BYU women's softball program. They've got a number of high-level players that have been nationally ranked in various preseason publications. Now, they did find out, and this is a disappointment, is that Jalen Lambert, who is the girlfriend of former BYU quarterback Jake Retzloff, she is a standout player in her own right. Well, she revealed on social media earlier this week that she came to a very difficult decision to have the way I read it, career-ending back surgery. And that's a disappointment because she was a all-conference type performer for BYU, and she was going into her senior season. And as she kind of talked about, it's a gut-wrenching decision to ultimately say, hey, I need to do this for the next however many years of my life versus this one season. Speaking of this, her senior season. And I'd never played at the Division I level, and I can only imagine the pain and the anguish and the woe is me almost that would have come upon me had I been grinding, getting ready for a senior season, and then essentially to be told, hey, you need to have what I think is career-ending back surgery. That's a disappointment. But she will be obviously rooting her teammates on, as she says, in a new role, and I think that her teammates can draw some inspiration from that. And I hope, like I said, that BYU softball goes out there and rocks it this year. I hope they make the NCAA tournament, because if you haven't watched collegiate softball, it's a lot of fun. It's kind of like women's and men's volleyball. If you want kind of offbeat sports that are really kind of unique, and if you start to pay attention to them, can be really, really fun. I think women's softball is just that. And I'm not saying that just because I'm married to a former Division I softball player. She was my introduction, speaking of my wife, to Division I softball. But I'll tell you, I have watched more collegiate softball in how long have I known my wife? 12 years I've known her. And it's not that she's sitting next to me saying, turn it on. She actually will catch me watching softball and be like, what are you doing? I'm like, just checking it out. It's fun. The College World Series for softball, really enjoyable. I can't force you guys to watch it, but hey, let's see how the Lady Cougars do, speaking of women's softball. And I hope they absolutely go out there and really show some things. They're starting fast, and they're going to have to be ready for challenge, but I respect that they have really kind of stepped up to the plate, to use the expression, and really shown some really nice strides being made. And here's to a season where they can do it once again. All right. That is going to do it for today's edition of the show. I had plans, to talk about return missionaries for the BYU football program, what I thought they could do having enrolled at mid-year. That was my plan to do that until, a certain chant broke out in Oklahoma State. But we'll talk about that tomorrow. So stay tuned for that. As always, you guys are absolutely awesome out there in Cougar Nation. Please continue to subscribe, rate, and review. If you want to take this to the next level, be a part of our Everydayer Club, please go to lockedoncougars.supercast.com to join that today. It's lockedoncougars.supercast.com. There's also a link in the show notes below. You'll also see a pop up here in a graphic you can click on as well. And also, for those of you on video, we're going to send you over to the first ever 24/7 national Locked On Podcast Network YouTube channel for more exclusive and unique Locked On content. Or if you're on audio, make sure you make your second listen, because this is your first listen, we often say, Locked On College Football. And you may actually hear a familiar voice on that show today, because I may or may not be talking with Spencer McLaughlin on Locked On College Football. But as always, thank you for your continued support of the show. Come back tomorrow and be an everydayer, as always, right here on the Locked On Cougars podcast.